Hello class, this is Professor Morrison and this is your presentation regarding the cultural narrative essay. What is a narrative essay? A narrative essay is a story about something that happened to you and is presented in essay form. So it's not a short story, but we do use storytelling elements in order to get across a main point or a purpose to our reader. A narrative essay follows a similar structure as other 5-paragraph essays, but there are some differences in style. And since you are the star of the story, you're not only allowed, but you're encouraged, and as a matter of fact, you must use first-person point of view. I, me, we, and our. I know that this is considered very informal, and we don't normally allow it in college writing, but with narrative, we absolutely have to use it because you're writing about yourself. And also, when the reader is reading your essay, you want them to feel like it's happening to them. And if they keep reading the word I and me, then they'll think that it's happening to them and will be able to engage with your story more easily. Now that you know that this narrative essay will be focused on something that happened to you, it's important to narrow down your choices. So every situation has a purpose in our lives, or it wouldn't have happened. And every story about these situations relates this purpose. So start thinking about who you are in cultural terms and what incidents have happened to you that taught a lesson or reinforced a belief about your own cultural identity, just like in the Lopez article. Okay, so sometimes we have major incidents that teach us things about ourselves and others and our role in the world culturally, and sometimes we have minor incidents. Some of these major incidents can really bring out how people feel about each other in terms of cultural identity, which can be good and can be bad, and sometimes in between. Natural disasters and how we react to them can bring this out in many people. The pandemic has been a good example of this, unfortunately. Many people have been treated differently because of the color of their skin or where they live. And a lot of times people were not getting the same type of medical opportunities as other people based on these. And that was a very unfortunate thing that made the news during the pandemic. Other emergency situations could happen, life-threatening circumstances such as car accidents and injuries. So with a car accident, perhaps if you were a female driving and you get in an accident and somebody has a problem with you because you're a female and this accident could or might not have been your fault, but they assume that it is simply because you're female, that could be a sort of incident to relate. Life-enhancing circumstances also bring out the best and the worst of people. Weddings, the birth of a child. If you ever want to hear people say terrible things about each other, be a wedding guest and just listen. So a lot of times these major incidents, aside from being traumatic in and of themselves, have cultural elements in them that we might write about for this essay. Minor incidents also have their roles to play in our lives, and they may not seem like a lot when they happen, but they are. And as long as they are teaching you a lesson or reinforcing a belief about your cultural identity, they're fair game for this essay, as long as you don't mind sharing that information with the class. So maybe confronting a bully, which is what my story is going to be about that I share with you. Quitting smoking, that can be very cultural. Dieting, body image is a huge cultural identifier. And there have been some excellent essays written about body image and about people who have really turned their lives around and become very healthy after not being as healthy, and how they feel and how they feel also culturally has changed. So all of these incidents have one thing in common. They all revolve around conflict. You have to have a conflict or you don't have a plot. That is what will keep your narrative moving forward towards a resolution. It does need to be a conflict that has already been resolved in order for you to write about it. And there are different types of conflict, external and internal. So let's think about how cultural identity and conflict are at play in Jack Lopez's Of Cholos and Surfers, which we are modeling our essay around in terms of cultural identity and elements and plot. Obviously, yours will be much shorter. Yours will be exactly 5 paragraphs, and his is much longer. But think about the different aspects of himself he's trying to reconcile in that moment where he's confronted with the other person. He is thinking about himself in terms of being a Latino, a son, a neighbor, a friend, a surfer. How does he put all of these together in that moment? This is a wonderful example of when he learned something about himself in terms of his cultural identity. And he learned that he could be every bit as much of a Latino and proud of it as the other person, but he could also be a surfer. And when he realized that, that opened up many doors to him. So if you're stuck trying to figure out what topic you could use, I suggest going down the list of types of conflict and asking yourself if you've had any of these in your life. Man versus man. Obviously, when we're saying man, we mean human, mankind. So man versus man versus nature, man versus society, man versus self, man versus supernatural, man versus fate, man versus technology. Ask yourself if you've had any of these types of conflict, and if so, did any of these have anything to do with an aspect of your cultural identity? All right, so here we have some examples of different types of conflict. So man versus man, confronting a bully. That's the example from my own life that I'm about to share. Confronting authority is another great one. We have man versus nature, earthquakes, thunderstorms. Of course, it would have to be more than just that. It would have to have something to do with your cultural identity in order for you to write about it in this class. Then we have internal conflict, man versus self. And a lot of times those were great for this class. It usually concerns choosing between right and wrong, quitting smoking, dieting, whether or not to come out of the closet. We never know how other people are going to react to these situations. Even smoking can be very cultural. And of course, body image is a really big identifier as to who we are in society. And of course, how we present ourselves in terms of gender is a very big cultural aspect of who we are. So all of these, even though they may not seem like big decisions, they are, and they're worthy of writing about if you're comfortable sharing them. So a lot of people have similar conflicts, but your experience matters because only you experienced what you are about to share. And that's what makes your reaction to it and how you're writing about it personal and authentic. So let's look at what elements need to be included in the cultural narrative essay. Well, more than in any other type of writing, narrative really calls out for sensory details. And so you want to make sure that you can provide very vivid, specific sensory details to bring the reader into your story. So ask yourself, when you're brainstorming, what did it look like, sound like, feel like, smell like, taste like? Whatever is appropriate to bring into your writing, make sure to put it down in your brainstorming so that you can decide whether or not to use it in your essay. Sometimes it's okay to include dialogue. As a matter of fact, it's more than okay, it's great. But you should only include 1 to 3 lines, keep it short, and keep it inside the paragraph. Do not break your structure to include the dialogue. Keep it inside the paragraph, and make sure it's not something boring like, how was your day? Make it something that stands out, that's part of the plot, preferably part of the conflict, the crisis, so that it's in paragraph 3, like, give me your lunch money. Or, I guess people don't really have lunch money anymore, it's all electronic, but something that shows the crisis when it's happening, and it shows characterization. Okay, so what is the next step? Well, you need to have conflict, specific concrete details, sparse, minimal dialogue, and maybe you have a couple incidents in mind already, but you need to make sure that you're following the correct structure. So each paragraph in this 5-paragraph narrative essay will correspond to a step within the narrative arc. Here we have the classic narrative arc, and we begin with exposition, which is, a normal day. Who, what, where, and when, and setup. You'll also have your thesis statement in this first paragraph. So this is paragraph 1. The second paragraph is rising action. How is this situation different from normal, this situation? What's going on here? Maybe we might want to put in a little bit of background so that our readers understand the situation better. Paragraph 3, and these should all be about a half page, is your climax, crisis. This is your oh no moment. Something bad is happening and you don't know how to fix it. You haven't even thought about trying to fix it. But it's happening and we need to hear it and see it and feel it. Then we have paragraph 4, and this is your falling action. This is how you're going to try and resolve this situation. What are your options? Do you have support? What's going to happen with this? And then at the end, we have paragraph 5, resolution. Everything is fixed. You've come out the other side and you've learned a lesson. And what is that lesson? What about your cultural identity did you learn? Jack Lopez learned that he could be a Latino and a surfer at the same time, and that he could be respected by people in his neighborhood for standing up for himself and saying, hey, I'm both. What did you learn about yourself in this incident? Here we have the narrative arc again, and denouement is just a fancy word for resolution. And these are some really good jump-starting, brainstorming questions. How have you formed your own identity? Think about it. Do some brainstorming. Consider your cultural background, including ethnicity, religious views, gender, etc. How have you learned to present your individual characteristics? Is there an incident that stands out? Use specific examples. How did these form? Why did these change? Think about it. This is all just for brainstorming. When you start outlining, keep in mind that first paragraph is going to have your exposition, your thesis statement, 3 assertions in chronological order, which I'll get to in a second, and the focus on an aspect of your cultural background that's changed over the years. The second paragraph, is kind of hard to see here, is your rising action. So the formation of your beliefs or details, maybe some background information. Remember, all of these paragraphs should be about the same size, which is roughly 10 sentences. Definitely no more than half a page for each paragraph, please. Third paragraph is your climax, conflict. Something terrible that's really alarming, oh no, that's going to lead to change. So with Jack Lopez, this is that moment he met the other person in the I believe it was an alley. He came across the other person and he thought, oh my goodness, my life's in danger. I have to decide who I am right now. And in that 4th paragraph, we're going to decide how we came to this resolution, right? Falling action, Finding new characteristics about yourself details what are your options for resolving this situation. And in your fifth paragraph, you have your conclusion. You're going to restate your thesis statement and 3 assertions at 1, 2, 3 that are going to match your paragraphs and wrap up gracefully. So you won't know your thesis statement until after you have brainstormed and outlined what's in each paragraph, because you need to put a brief summary of what's in your second, third, and fourth paragraphs at the end of your thesis statement and then match them to each paragraph. But I have an example for you. So we'll get to that in a moment. So the first step in the narrative arc, and that's your first paragraph, your introduction, is exposition. And exposition gives a very brief overview of what normal looks like before the crisis. So a normal day now or a normal day then with your current set of characteristics or with the ones that you had at that time. It's really up to you. Your first paragraph should include your thesis statement and your exposition. The cultural aspect should be implied, and a prediction of the 3 assertions or incidents that occur in your story should also be included. So what are those cultural expressions? Well, there's just a huge long list. They wouldn't all fit on here. But we can say that there are some here. Some cultural identifiers are family, faith, race, gender, education. The list goes on. How do we express these identifiers? Sometimes through fashion, accents, mannerisms, food, music. Really, it's a long list there also. And I encourage you to please watch the videos that I've provided about people telling their narrative stories, their cultural narratives, especially the one about a trip to the grocery store, because that's the very best example that there is. And I also have 2 sample essays that you can read as well. All right, so rising action, this is going to be that first assertion. It's also the second step of the narrative arc, and therefore it's your second paragraph. It should include the rising action by detailing the first of the 3 assertions included in your introduction. You know how your introduction is the main idea because 1, 2, and 3? Well, this is 1. And it's going to match that first body paragraph. So this incident should clearly describe how normal is different without revealing the crisis yet. So, for instance, forming beliefs based upon those who surround you as you mature. Now, you can talk about any age, really, as long as you can remember it clearly. And I'm going to actually be focusing on something that happened to me in 5th grade. So I need to give you just a little bit of background. I was born in 1969, so that makes me old. I am not young. And my mother was not married when she had me. And in 1969, that was a really big deal. And so she faced isolation and ostracization from her family and her neighborhood. And it was not celebrated. My birth was not celebrated. I was a huge embarrassment to the family, and the neighborhood brought shame on everybody. So my mom moved out and by herself, and she decided at 20 years old she was going to try and make it, and she met my stepfather when I was 4. And she is tall, blonde, and blue-eyed, and he is full-blooded Mexican. His father came over with Pancho Villa as a water boy, crossed over from Texas at the end of that situation. And as a matter of fact, he was born when his father was very old, in his 50s, almost 60. So he was the little oops surprise baby. And he is Mexican, and my mother is German and English. And they got married. And in 1973, That was a big deal also. Right now, people don't seem to mind, and that's wonderful that people can marry anyone, right? Back then, it was kind of a big deal, and my mother was a trailblazer again. But I was a little 4-year old, and it did not occur to me that there was anything going on that was different from, this was just life to me. I thought it was fascinating. Some people in my family spoke Spanish, some people spoke English, some people were Catholic, some were Lutheran, some ate this, some ate that. I thought it was just wonderful, and I was so lucky to have these two families. And so this is a rising action, how things are different for me than perhaps they were in the world or in East LA where we happen to live. Okay, so the crisis or the climax is that third step of the narrative arc. So now we're going to focus on this one incident that happened over a day, a week, really no more than a week. It just really needs to be a moment that was going to happen to us. It's going to shake up our world and ask us who we are, kind of like Lopez had to do in that moment. This is our Lopez moment, all right? We need to take normal and different and morph it into, oh no. And so the moment when that cultural aspect is challenged through conflict. So let's just remember that it was a different world in the 70s. We didn't have computers and databases. My mother was really embarrassed that she had me when she was not married. And she faced a lot of harassment because of that. And so when she started me in kindergarten when I was 4, after she married my stepfather, she lied. And she told them that my last name was his last name so that nobody would question who my father was, which I finally met him when I was 18. But at this point, I don't know. The only person I know is my dad, is dad. And now suddenly I have his last name too. And nobody challenged me about that at all, until 5th grade. And there was a new student, Vicky Rojas. And this is real, so I can say her name. And she did not like me. And I don't know why. I mean, what's not to like, right? But she didn't like me. And what she especially didn't like was that she felt I was a white girl with a Hispanic last name. And she challenged me because she felt that I was not, quote unquote, a true Hispanic. And there was one day we were at recess, me and my friends, like 3 of my friends. Barbara Diaz was my very best friend. And there were 2 other girls there. And I remember Barbara was this tiny thing with lots and lots of long curly hair. And she looked like she could be blown away in the slightest breeze. Little girl, right? And we're just, normally we would just sit under the tree and talk at recess, but for some reason that day, we had no business being on the baseball diamond. But we thought, well, how fun would it be to kind of pretend we know what we're doing and toss the ball around? I mean, it's recess. Why not? Well, Vicky was very athletic, and she actually played a lot of baseball. And usually her group of people would be on the baseball diamond, but no one was there. And so we thought it would be okay if we went. And I was at home plate, and Barbara and the others were kind of scattered around. And she and her friend, she had 3 or 4 friends with her as well, came up to me at recess on the baseball diamond, and she told me basically why were we there. It was her spot. And I said, well, anybody could be here, and no one was here. And she threatened to beat me up for having a Mexican last name and being white. And in that moment, I couldn't even breathe. I just didn't know what to do. And I was just thinking, well, it's my name. I can't change my name. And she was a lot taller and stronger than I was. And she looked really menacing and intimidating. And I had every reason to believe that she meant it. And so this is my oh no moment. Okay, falling action. This is our 4th step. So it is our fourth paragraph. You circle that there. It should include your following action. So that's the third of the 3 incidents included in your introduction, your assertions. Following actions should describe the moment when a plan to resolve the crisis takes shape. It's your what do I do now moment. So I reacted to this conflict with fear and uncertainty, but planning to resolve it as realistically as possible, whether this is morally right or wrong. This had not been an issue in the past. I was completely blindsided. I couldn't change my name back to my original last name. I didn't even think that I could. I couldn't fight her. She is definitely stronger than I was. Some of my friends were, they were there and they were behind me. They didn't know what to do either. And so Barbara comes up and she has this little thing behind me, and I look at her and she's got her hand on her hip and she's trying to look all intimidating. And she says to Vicky, if you want to fight her, you're going to have to fight us too. And Vicky's like, well, that's no problem because I've got my friends too. And she looked behind her and her friends were running away. And she looked terrified in that moment. And then she ran away. And I was like, oh my goodness, thank you, Barbara. And they're like, we're not going to let anyone beat you up. We don't care what your name is. We love you. And I was like, thank you so much. I love you too. And then, but it caused this like 5th grade existential crisis. What is my name? And what should I do? And I asked my mother what some of those words in Spanish were that she called me, and she told me never to repeat those again. And she told me this is my name now and I can't change it either, and that if I were to try and change it, it would cause a lot of problems for her and for my dad, and I didn't want that and she didn't want that. And so I felt like I didn't really have any options. At least I didn't get beat up. And Vicky knew I had a posse. And I couldn't change my name. So what was I going to do? How did I feel about that? Okay, so that leaves us with the resolution. We only have 1 paragraph left. It's our 5th step of the narrative art. It's your conclusion. Everything needs to be solved. So you have a restatement of your thesis, a mention of that cultural aspect, and you want to wrap up the journey that you've taken this reader on. So you want to describe the moment when the crisis is resolved. So forming a new identity aspect in regards to culture. So I told that new student, Vicky, remember I had told her that she could beat me up. Well, I actually had talked to her later in class and I said, well, you could beat me up if you want to, but I can't change my name. And she had been scared when my friends had said that as well. So that wasn't going to be on the table anymore. But I did explain, not to her, but to my friends, that even though I was not born Mexican, my dad was the only dad I had ever known, and that I did not consider myself to be Hispanic. And I may not have spoken a lot of Spanish. I understand a lot more than I speak. But I was proud of what I had learned. And I thought it was great to be part of a family of people who are different from what I had known before. I was a hybrid, and I was okay with that. So what did you learn, and how does that carry with you today? So I think this carries with me today because I am so much more diverse than people might think when they look at me. And I've had so many experiences that people may not ever guess, that it helps me to maybe have some insight into people who are struggling to find their own identities and do things a little differently from maybe what society says they should. And I'm just their biggest cheerleaders, because I know what it's like to be that square peg and not fit into a round hole. And I think that my experiences and maybe this experience really helped me to learn, to stand up for myself and to be who I am, even if people don't understand that. And so what did you learn, and how do you feel about yourself now? So now you know you should select a topic that includes a cultural aspect, and there's a long list of those: ethnicity, religious beliefs, gender, body image, smoking, whatever it is. There has to be a conflict, sensory details so we can experience it. Maybe some dialogue, 1 to 3 lines, and of course, all 5 steps of the narrative arc in that order. And you only get 1 paragraph per step, and each paragraph should be roughly a half-page long. So please try not to go longer than that. Sometimes it's hard, but we have to delete some words. We don't need all the words. I know I want to give all the words too, but we can't always do that. We have to decide in our revising process which words we're keeping and which words we're not. All right, so now comes the hard part. You're ready to select a topic. So free writing and brainstorming begins now. One method that you might want to try for your brainstorming is called clustering or mind mapping. And you write your main topic in the circle in the middle of the paper, and you think of ideas that relate to the topic and you draw them in the connecting circles. And then you keep drawing more circles and you have more ideas, and maybe you have a triangle instead of a circle or whatever shapes you want. And then you just keep adding to your ideas, and your cluster can go off in all different directions. This is a really good visual way to brainstorm. You don't have to do it this way, but it's an idea. So here's an example of a cluster that somebody is talking about getting a dog, and how learning about responsibility and love and a new experience is part of it. Notice that experience is misspelled. Do we care at this point? Not at all. Nobody, well, I'm going to see it. You'll turn it in, but I'm not going to judge you for it. See how getting is misspelled? We don't mind. At this point, we're just getting ideas out on paper, and that's the whole point of pre-writing and even your rough draft. Although the rough draft that you put on the discussion board will be proofread, we know that it is a rough draft and that it still has work to do. Here's another example of brainstorming and kind of almost even outlining this narrative essay planner. So you want to think of a few things to describe, something that you remember that really stands out. So you have your introduction. What do we need to know? What's that rising action, climax, falling action, resolution, conclusion? What should you describe in each of these areas? Doing something like this may help you to stay on track so you don't go off topic. This is an example of how to use the planner, but keep in mind that this particular subject is not an appropriate one for this assignment. It's not about cultural identity. This is just a normal narrative. I just want to show you what a planner looks like filled in. All right, so the essay itself, it is 5 paragraphs, as I've mentioned, 900 words, which is roughly 3 pages. And you're going to focus on one incident, like I did in my 3rd paragraph was one incident that occurred in the past that spanned a day, a couple days, or at the very most a week. Use specific, vivid, concrete details to describe this single incident, and be sure to include 1 to 3 lines of dialogue in the crisis, which should be situated in paragraph 3. So let's describe the process of coming up with a thesis statement for this essay. So your thesis statement is always the very last sentence of the 1st paragraph. That is the only place that it ever goes. It is the last sentence of your introduction. So your thesis statement should mention a conflict regarding a cultural identifier and an expression of it, along with a preview of those 3 events in the essay that follow the narrative arc. Those are your assertions. So here's an example of the process of trying to come up with a thesis. Obviously yours won't have what I have in parentheses or the numbers. I'm just trying to show it my thought process. So you can phrase it a little differently, but make sure it has all the elements. So I'm going to start off with one time that I learned how to resolve an aspect of my cultural identity. In this case, it was ethnicity, and my identifier was my name. But you don't necessarily have to write that here, but you could. And the conflict here was peer pressure. Was when I was confronted about my name. That was the expression of the cultural identifier in rising action. Experienced bullying for being different. 2, and then 3, decided that I like being a hybrid. So in my rising action, I would have to start my topic sentence would have to say something about my name, and I would give a little history about how my mother changed my name kind of illegally in order to enroll me in school and to avoid further harassment for being a single unwed mother. And so I would have to make sure that my name is mentioned, even though I don't get to the bullying until that third paragraph. I'm going to say my name was changed without the proper legal processes in order to save my mother embarrassment when she enrolled me in school. And then I would give that background information in that paragraph too. And then the second assertion is going to be in paragraph 3, and that's the bullying for being different, being a white girl with a Mexican last name, which the other person did not like or appreciate. And then my falling action is my decision-making process, and that leads me to just being a hybrid and being okay with it. And so I was going through all those decisions in my mind in the fourth paragraph, which is the third assertion, and I came up with the decision that I like being a hybrid. So we want to make sure that our topic sentences match these assertions. Even though this decision is in paragraph 5, I was coming up with it in paragraph 4, which matches my third assertion. I hope that makes sense. Numbers are not really my thing. We have the 5 paragraphs, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then these 3 are going to be represented in this thesis statement. And all we have to do is make sure our topic sentences match each of these things in some way, maybe not the exact words, but in ideas. So my actual thesis statement, after I'm done drafting it, would look something like this. One time that I learned how to resolve an aspect of my cultural identity with peer pressure was when I was challenged regarding my name, bullied on the playground, and realized that I like being different. So I've changed my words, and that's fine. So my name would be mentioned in that rising action. My mother changed my name. The bullying is in the topic sentence for the crisis. And I would say something like, I needed to realize what to do or how I felt about this in that fourth paragraph, which is my falling action. And then this is the realization that I came up with. So you're encouraged to be creative when composing your thesis and your essay, but just make sure that the necessary elements are present and the organizational structure is followed. So your thesis statement doesn't have to have the same words in it as mine does, but it should still be logically presented. So in terms of structure, your essay should contain an introductory paragraph with a thesis statement and 3 supporting details like we just went over. That's the end of the introduction. The beginning of the introduction is your exposition, the who, what, where, and when. You need to have a hook, background information, and then your thesis. Then you need to have 3 body paragraphs, each about a half page long, that addresses supporting details with specific evidence. So you have a topic sentence that matches each of your 1, 2, 3. You have those 3 supporting details. 1, 2, 3. 1 gets a paragraph, 2 gets a paragraph, and 3 gets a paragraph. And then you have a conclusion paragraph that summarizes the thesis statement and mentions the supporting details, along with a personal component that wraps up the main theme of the essay, kind of like how this lesson still is carried with you to this day. Okay, so the essay will be evaluated in terms of unity, support, coherence, MLA formatting, and sentence skills. There should be no research involved in this essay, as it is all about you. If you have any questions, please let me know.